Yeah, John's solar storage. He's been working on that. That's not being told the pictures frozen now, but. Or I can stay out of the IT business entirely if you would prefer, which would be fine.
Okay. It's always a challenge.
Are we good?
All right, we're supposed to be back with some sound and hopefully some picture. So let's go ahead and go back on the record. So apologize for that little disruption. So I will have you come up and introduce your witnesses, and when the witnesses are speaking or answering a question, I will ask you to come up and be sure and speak into the microphone. Hopefully, everything that way will be heard today. So, okay, let's go ahead then and begin. Amron, would you like to lead us off?
Sure, and you want the witnesses to come forward so that you can then swear them in, or can they just be sworn in from wherever they are?
They can just stand.
All right. I have with me today Laura Moore to talk about the revenue requirement portion of the stipulation agreement. I have Steve Wills to talk about the rate design, and on the phone, we also have our national rate design expert, Ahmad Faruqi.
Okay, and staff, your witnesses are?
Our witnesses are numerous. Let's see, first of all, we have Mr. Mark Oligschlager, Lisa Ferguson, and John Cassidy from the auditing department. We also have Mr. Jay Lubert, Robin Cleathermos, Sarah Lange, and who else was I? Oh, Lisa Wildaber and Claire Eubanks. Yes. Let's see, who else do we have? We have Ms. Natel Dietrich.
What did you say?
I don't know. And Brad Fortson. We basically didn't know what your questions would be, Judge, so we just brought a little bit of everybody. Hopefully, and we'll probably not have the one person here that you actually do want, the way these things work in the past. So I believe that's all.
All right.
Thank you.
Public counsel.
Thank you, Judge. Following an opposite philosophy, we've provided the witness of Jeff Mark to speak to OPC's rate design and revenue requirement issues. However, we can provide the other witnesses that have filed testimony if the commission should want to ask more specific questions.
Thank you. Consumers Counsel, did you bring any witnesses today?
No, we had, since our issue settled, we did not bring Jackie Hutchison with us.
All right, thank you. Division of Energy.
Thank you, Judge. Division of Energy's issues also have ostensibly settled, but if the commissioners or yourself are interested in hearing from our witnesses, I have with me today Mr. Martin Hyman and Ms. Marcy Early. Can you pronounce your name for us? Early is how her name is pronounced. Mr. Hyman provided time of use testimony, and Ms. Early provided testimony on weatherization. Thank you.
Missouri Energy Consumers Group.
Your Honor, I didn't bring a witness. Mr. Chris's testimony was limited to the issues of revenue allocation and rate design, and hopefully I can speak on that if the commission has any questions.
All right, thank you. Missouri Industrial Energy Consumers.
Judge, the MIAC also has no witnesses here today, but I anticipate that I can answer questions.
Thank you. National Resources Defense Council.
NRDC has no witness in the case. Sierra Club's witness was limited to issues that are not covered by the stipulation and agreement.
Okay. Renew Missouri.
I did not bring our witness, Ms. Piontek, today, and I believe I can answer any questions you might have.
All right, thank you. At this time, would all of those witnesses that are present that were mentioned, would you please stand? Could you please raise your right hand if you're able? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you may give at this hearing today it will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. Thank you. Go ahead and be seated. Thank you, Mr. Faruqi. All right, with that, then I will again ask Ameren if you would like to begin with an opening statement presentation.
I'm going to try to turn this monstrosity around. I really didn't contemplate how large it was. You also have a printout of this at your chair. Sometimes you can't see them. I don't think that's a problem, is it? Good morning, Commissioners. Judge, you ready?
Go ahead.
So we're here today to answer some questions about the stipulation and agreement that was filed on February 28th and which was amended with 2 minor corrections on March 2nd. When Ameren, Missouri filed this case last summer, we requested a rate decrease, but the focus of our request was really on issues of rate design. As we start installing smart meters this summer, we recognize the importance of ensuring that our customers can access the value of those meters as soon as possible after installation. We want to provide customers with choices as to the rate that makes the most sense for their household and businesses. And we're doing that by modernizing our rate design to provide customers with the options we believe they want. So how does this settlement agreement reach those goals? Well, it's a settlement, so by definition, no party got exactly what it wanted. But we see the agreement as a positive step and definitely in the right direction for the rate options we hope to offer our customers. But we should start by talking about the revenue requirement. We've agreed to reduce our revenue requirement by $32 million effective April 1st. This is a black box number, but it does include a return on equity in the range of 9.4 to 9.8%, and includes certain adjustments to rate base, including an agreement that for purposes of this settlement, the solar facility at BJC was not in service at the end of 2019. The company also agrees not to file its next rate case before July 6th of this year. The agreement continues the fuel adjustment clause, and we will be providing some specific additional information in our monthly reporting. Also, as related to our generating units, we will retain and provide information from the daily analysis we conduct to determine unit commitment status for our coal-fired generating units. This should allow staff and other parties to more accurately review unit commitment decisions that are made. This information will be shared when we make our rate case filing. So let's move on to the heart of this stipulation from our viewpoint, and that's the rate design portion. In the stipulation, paragraphs 26 and 27 deal with residential rate design, and that's what I'll mostly discuss. The monthly customer charge stays the same at $9. Now, as I've already indicated, we believe this settlement provides customers with more modern rate design options, providing choice which allows customers to exert more control over their bills and usage. This happens because modern rate designs send clearer and more accurate price signals to customers, promote efficient use of the grid, and promote electrification, which in turn improves environmental sustainability. To walk through this menu of new rate options, I would like to call your attention to this exhibit. Now, it was prepared for demonstration purposes only, and so the descriptions and the names could change, but I wanted to share it with you because I found it very helpful as I thought through the rate design options that come out of this stipulation. You also have a printout at your chair. Now, on the left, you'll see a spectrum arrow with greater cost certainty at the top and greater opportunity to save at the bottom. Depending on what the customer desires to achieve, they'll be able to select the option that best fits that desire. So starting at the top with the flat rate, that has the greatest cost certainty and is the non-varying traditional rate that our customers are used to. They can reduce overall total usage, it will help them save, and we have a variety of energy efficiency programs to help them do that. The next rate is labeled default day-night. That will become the default rate for customers with AMI meters. Although no customer will be moved to this rate prior to January 1, 2021. This rate allows customers to save a little by shifting usage to overnight hours, such as using the delay function on your dishwasher, with little risk of higher bills. For existing customers, within 6 months after they receive their AMI meter, Ameren Missouri will communicate with the customer to educate them on what their bill would have been in prior billing months under available rate options, and will be shifted to the day-night rate unless that customer selects an alternative option at that time. The difference in rates between day and night is very low, so there isn't expected to be significant bill impacts to customers, and correspondingly, there isn't as significant of an opportunity to save by shifting usage to night. But for customers who are interested in that, we have more options. So in the middle of the spectrum, you see evening savers. Now, originally that was described as EV savers in the direct testimony of company witness Steve Wills. This is a time of use option. This rate option will be marketed and apply to whole house usage instead of being limited only to electric vehicle charging customers. However, we are planning to evaluate technological solutions which will allow us to isolate any EV charging load without incurring the cost of installing a second utility meter. And as we agreed in the stipulation, we will be meeting with the Sierra Club and other interested stakeholders no later than March 1st, 2021, regarding the steps needed to make the sub-metering available to EV charging customers. Now, this rate is designed for AMI meters, but it will be compatible with and available on an opt-in basis to customers using the company's existing AMR meters for an incremental cost of $1.50 a month. This rate will have 2 seasons, summer and non-summer. Customers can elect summer only or year-round. We did that to provide protection for customers that heat with electricity in the winter. The on-peak hours are 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. daily, and off-peak hours are 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. daily. The evening savers rate allows customers to create more savings than the prior 2 rates, the flat rate or the default day-night rate, if the customer can move usage to overnight, and especially for those who charge their EVs at night. The next rate is Smart Savers. This provides an even greater opportunity to save by avoiding higher priced peak hours through actively managing use, like through using a smart thermostat to adjust temperatures during peak times. This rate is a more complex 3-period time of use rate that will only be available to customers with AMI metering. The peak period, weekdays from 2 to 7 p.m. in summer months, 6 to 8 a.m. and 6 to 8 p.m. in non-summer months. The intermediate periods span the rest of the daytime hours, including holidays and weekends, and off-peak applies overnight, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 7 days a week. And then finally, the last class is Ultimate Savers. This is a 3-part rate that includes a demand charge and a time-varying energy charge, and provides customers who participate the greatest opportunity to save money. This rate option is best if major appliance and cooling can be staggered through smart home coordination, for example. Now, as part of this, Ameren Missouri agreed not to propose a residential or small general service demand charge based on any basis other than an opt-in basis until after August 29th, 2025. And we also agreed to do some special reporting within 6 months after having 500 customers participating in this 3-part rate. Ameren Missouri is very excited to offer these new modern rate options to customers, and we want to ensure that our communication with and education of our customers is targeted and effective. We want customers to know they have these choices and to know how to exercise control over their bill. To that end, we note we will provide customers with a notice of intent to install AMI meters at least 30 days prior to installation, and will provide an opportunity to opt out of that installation if they so choose. No later than the date that the AMI meter is installed, a customer will receive information regarding these rate options. We're developing an online neutral rate comparison tool that will show the customer their bill under each available rate option based on their historic usage, and we'll be communicating to customers how to access that tool. We are working diligently to meet the timeframe set forth in paragraph 27 of the stipulation, but there's a lot of IT work that has to be completed. So we've agreed to meet with staff, DE, and OPC monthly in March, April, May, and June of this year to discuss the rollout of customer engagement for customers receiving AMI meters and the timeframes contained within the stipulation. So one last point on the stipulation, I would note that there are two issues, both raised by the Office of Public Counsel, that remain to be tried. They are the sharing percentage for the FAC and affiliate transaction issue as it relates to Ameren services costs. The stipulation contemplates that the Commission will approve new rates to be effective April 1st without any adjustment for these issues, and it contains mechanisms for implementation of any Commission decision on these issues that would otherwise impact the revenue requirement to be implemented in the next rate case. Any change to the FAC tariff would be effectuated in this case, but after the April 1st deadline. As I indicated earlier, I have Laura Moore, Steve Wills, and Ahmed Farouki available for specific questions. Thank you.
Right. Commissioners, would you like to ask questions of Ameren this time, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the chart that was handed out. I would like to see something with some more specificity to it.
Gotcha.
With actual numbers attached to these programs. Perfect.
Hopefully this is what you're thinking.
Yes, that's much more helpful to me. Thank you.
Would you circulate these?
And this is probably a question for the whole room, but which parties have not signed on?
All the parties have signed on. Renew Missouri is not objecting. They have not signed on, but they're not objecting.
Is Renew Missouri here?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
I believe your time period to object is 7 days. At this time, do you plan on objecting before Friday?
No, we indicated, and I believe it's in the stipulation, that we do not intend to object.
Okay, great. And then the rate decrease is set to go into effect April 1st? Is that what I
That's
understand?
our request, so that you guys issue the order in time that we can make it effective April 1st.
Okay.
It'll become effective whenever the order. But
Sure.
That's our
Okay.
goal.
Perfect. What is the rate base amount?
Laura? This is why you have experts. And I assume you're asking for total rate base,
Yes.
not just what was added in this case.
Right, total rate base, because I believe with the PISA statute, we need that number looking forward.
Can I take that to get back to you in a moment?
Okay.
I apologize, that seems like something we should know. We'll get it.
Okay, on the AMIs, you mentioned that 6 months after a customer receives an AMI, they will get some communication looking back on their actual usage for those 6 months as to what the rate plans would have offered them had they been on those. Is that?
Right, so at 6 months after you get the AMI meter, you're going to flip to this default rate. But before that happens, we plan to have communication with customers, and we also plan to have the tool online where they can go in. We'll have 6 months of AMI data. They can go in and see how their bills would fare under all these rates. And then if they don't want to do the default day-night rate, they can select a different rate.
Okay, so they'll get 6 months worth of data, and then they'll have to make a decision when they receive that information, or they're automatically flipped to the
They are
second one?
automatically flipped to the default unless they contact us and say they want another option.
Okay, but they'll have a full 6 months of actual data on their house? Or their
That's the goal,
usage?
yes.
Okay. And
Right?
what's the reasoning for the $1.50 monthly incremental fee for non-IMI customers on the EV Saver rate?
just the additional work that's required to read the meters. Do you have something more specific?
Yeah, we will have to
Please,
change.
wait. Can you please identify yourself?
Absolutely. Steve Wills for Ameren, Missouri.
Thank you. Go ahead.
To actually put someone on that rate, we have to, under the AMR system, we actually have to go out and change out the meter for one that has a different meter program on it. And given the short life of probably the expectation of what that meter change out would have remaining before it gets swapped out to an AMI meter, we tried to build something that would represent the incremental cost of essentially that meter over the remaining life because customers will some within a couple of months and some within 5 years will be getting an AMI meter. So it's a meter that's not going to be used for like a full meter life. So we're putting a little bit of an incremental cost on it to reflect the cost of that meter change out.
So if you're going to have to go out and change the meter to a middleman meter in the time, in between, why wouldn't you just take them an AMI meter at that time?
Because the network actually has to be active in their area. There's going to be a geographic staging of the AMI so there's a different communications network for the AMI meters versus the AMR meters, different network communicating devices. And if someone, for example, we're going to start our AMI rollout in the St. Charles area. If someone in southern Missouri or central Missouri wanted to go on to the EVs or the evening savers rate or however it ends up being finally branded, but they lived in Jefferson City, for example, they wouldn't have the communications network to actually pull information from an AMI meter. They'd still be working off of the network communication devices that talk to AMR meters.
And do you already have that geographic rollout planned where we could see when people are expected to be on those meters in certain areas?
Yeah, I know that there's information. I don't know if there's anything in the record in this case on it, but I know there was. We have a case where we had applied for some waivers from a few rules, commission rules, to help implement the AMI case, and I know that had a graphic on there that showed the staging of where they are, and I know we can also, I'm sure we can find that and get it to you for your information.
Okay, and during this rollout process, will you be giving the commission regular updates if there are any delays, or?
I'm sure we would be able to do that and be willing to do that, yeah.
I think the plan is to keep staff updated. If the commission wants specific updates, we could arrange that. We could file something in the record, I suppose. But our plan obviously is to, as we always do, is try to keep staff informed as to what's going on.
Okay, thank you. When is Ameren planning to file their IRP?
Before October 1st, 2020, so late September, I think.
Okay, so you've mentioned in the stipulation agreement several meetings with stakeholders that are planned out. Mm-hmm. Those are going to be held April through June. So is there going to be enough time between those meetings and whatever's produced in those meetings and your IRP to include the work product of those meetings in the IRP, or is there going to be?
I think to the extent it needs to go into the IRP, there will be plenty of time. We will be having, in the not too distant future, the meetings that are required by the IRP rules after we have all the inputs chapters done and parties give us feedback on that. The specific meetings that we talked about in April, May, June, are talking about the IT work in order to roll out some of this to ensure that it's going along as planned and we don't have some kind of hiccup going on, to talk about customer education and how we plan to handle that as well. It's specific to the rollout of AMI.
Okay. And on the communication with customers, once they've received their AMI and the 6 months later, is that by mail? Is that by email? Is that
I think
multi-platform outreach, or?
I would expect it to be multi-platform. We're still working through that, and that's part of the reason that staff requested we have some of these conversations so that they can see how the rollout of communication is going to work. I would say it's not completely finalized right now, but we all know you have to hit customers multiple times in different ways in order to make sure they hear the message.
Okay. The net base energy cost amount of looks like $397,234,767. Is that the true up period amount per staff's analysis, or is that different?
It's an agreed upon number by the parties.
It looks like we've got somebody else.
It is in fact staff's true up net base energy cost.
Okay. And what was, this is back, question for Ameren again, what is the net base energy cost from the last Ameren rate case?
Jim, do you know what that was?
I can't tell you exactly, but I am pretty confident, maybe Ms. Lamore can, I'm pretty confident it's about 110 million-ish more than the net base energy costs in this case.
And why is there such a large decline?
Our transportation costs have gone down substantially, our coal transportation costs.
Okay.
Coal commodity as well. There's a number of reasons because some of it is driven by production cost modeling, so it depends on energy prices and what the level of system sales, et cetera, would be. But certainly delivered coal costs have gone down significantly, and Mr. Meyer talked about that in his testimony that will be of record in this case.
So are you confident that that number is not too low as to set up future paybacks in future periods?
We believe it's an accurate number, it's the correct number to use.
Okay.
Is reality going to turn out to be something different? It always does.
Okay. Do you have our rate base number?
Yes. The rate base number is approximately $8.1 billion.
$8.1 billion.
Yes.
And can you give the court reporter your name?
Oh, I'm sorry.
first,
Laura
please?
Moore for Ameren, Missouri.
Thank you.
Okay. And do all of the parties agree 8.1 billion? Okay.
And I'm seeing, just for the record, I'm seeing general nods of heads and no, no disagreement.
Thank you, Judge. And is there an agreed on capital structure to apply the ROE range to?
There's not.
Okay. All right, that's all my questions at the moment, Judge. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Kinney, did you have questions? Commissioner Root?
I have questions on Mr. Willis, but not for how do you want to handle it?
Yeah.
I am happy to cede the podium to Steve.
Thank you. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Good.
In your testimony on page 54, you quote, Dr. Faruqi has performed extensive research on the efficacy of time-varying rates at numerous utilities. Among his key findings related to time-of-use rates is that in order to achieve significant load shifting, peak periods need to be relatively short in duration, parentheses, a few hours, and need to have a significant pricing differential relative to off-peak periods. So that was testimony that you filed. So my questions are going to follow based off that, assuming that statement is still correct.
Yes, I think that is still correct.
So thank you for handing this out, because I had some questions on what it was. So just walk me through. First, I want to start with the default rate. Stipulation agreement really didn't quite state what the hours of on and off peak, but looking at your sheet, we're looking at 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. For daytime and evening is 9 p.m. to 9 a.m.
That's correct.
Okay. That is what, 12 hours?
Yes.
Is that long of a time period consistent with Dr. Faruqi's statement that they need to be very short, relatively short in duration, a few hours to have significant pricing differential?
No, I don't think the 12 hours is probably in the range of what's, at least in my opinion, and Dr. Faruqi is on the phone also if we want to ask him, but what is contemplated by his. And I think really, if I could expound just a little bit on it, I think that's why we kind of have a spectrum here. I don't think the anticipation is the default rate. It's more of an idea of gradualism, of easing customers into time of use, but that rate in and of itself isn't intended to have huge amounts of load shifting. It's more of an introduction to the concept, but certainly we believe the bottom two rate options, are going to meet that criteria.
So the price differential on the default time of view, daytime to overnight night rates is how much?
I believe in the summer it's a half a cent, and in the winter, in the non-summer period, I believe it's a quarter of a cent. I think I have that here.
So your default time of use rate is 12 hours long, and your price differential to try to achieve, pricing is a half a cent.
Correct. Again, I think that we acknowledge that that is probably not going to produce large amounts of load shifting. But again, this is in the rate making world, we talk a lot about gradualism, where we don't necessarily want to throw customers onto something where they're going to get bill shock, so to speak. So the other thing that having those long periods and narrow windows is going to do is going to prevent immediate bill shock for customers. So it's kind of a gradualism approach that hopefully those customers that are able to shift load and create savings, we have the opportunity to move them down onto rates that accomplish those objectives in the way that Dr. Faruqi has talked about it.
Do you think the average customer will see any difference in a half of a cent?
What I had calculated is that it's likely to be about within 1% of their bill on the base rate. Roughly 1%, depends on the season and their usage characteristics.
So your default rate that you're trying to introduce everybody to help them to have a positive impact and positive view of time of use rates, to help them understand that they can save money, is a half a cent, and maybe you're estimating a 1% change, and that's how you want to present time of use rates to your customers. That's their initial product rollout.
So that's if they don't make another election, but they will have other options in that product rollout, and hopefully we can communicate to those who have an interest or have the ability to create more savings that we have an option that's really going to meet their desires as well. So there should be options that have substantially greater opportunities to reduce the bill and create load shifting that's going to benefit the system.
So is your goal to enroll them in this default program, give them 6 months of data, so that they would realize that the default program isn't saving them any money and that there's an option that could save them more? Were you hoping to introduce it to them that way and saying, oh, well, the default one isn't doing me anything, but here's another option that could actually save me money?
I think the way I would characterize the goal with that was to not create massive bill impacts by something that we did by default, so that customers weren't surprised by a shock, but to start a process with them of communication and education, and to give them those options to push deeper into the opportunities to save part of the spectrum here when they're ready on their schedule. But our concern with a default rate otherwise being something like, and I proposed the Smart Savers rate in my testimony, and honestly I think it's a very good rate, but I do think if we defaulted customers onto that, the bill impacts would be pretty extreme, and that could create some really significant customer concerns and complaints if we defaulted them to something like that. So what we're trying to do is use a gradualism and an education approach to say, here's a place where you're going to see some time differentiation. If you're comfortable with that and ready to move farther, we've got a place for you to accomplish your goals.
What do you anticipate the amount of people that will actually move off of the default rate and choose another rate? What is your projections?
We haven't explicitly forecasted anything. I think if we look in Dr. Faruqi's testimony has some adoption rates in other jurisdictions. I think some of the numbers, the one that comes to immediately to mind that I know is in Dr. Faruqi's testimony, and this would be something that we would anticipate over time, not on day one, but I think in Oklahoma Gas and Electric's Smart Hours rate, they have about 20% uptake of what we think of as some of the more sophisticated modern rate designs.
And what was their default rate?
I believe their default. I don't believe it's time varying, so I think it would be something closer to our flat rate.
So half
Dr. Faruqi may know specifically.
So a half cent difference in their default rate, and then is that similar to what was rolled out in Oklahoma that saw the 20% uptick in others?
I don't believe they have anything that relates exactly to the default day-night rate. It's my knowledge.
Out of all the utilities in the United States that you've looked at, is this half cent typical with a 12-hour time period? Is that a typical default rate that you see that you modeled off of other states?
No.
Is there any other states that are utilities that have used a default rate that has a a half cent or lower incentive?
I'm not aware of one.
Do you have any idea what the typical default rate differential is on when a utility rolls out a time of use rate?
There's some tables in Dr. Faruqi's testimony that shows some ranges. I can't recite those, from memory here, but I think they're substantially larger in many cases for those utilities that have default time of use, which is a growing number, but it's not an incredibly large number right now anyway. The defaulting onto time of use is, I think, a relatively emerging, and again, Dr. Faruqi would have some perspective on that if we'd like to have him discuss it at all. But I think the movement towards default time of use is in the last several years, and there's not a huge body of where that's going to fall, but I do think it would be substantially larger in most cases where that's going on.
So I understand Ameren likes to be conservative. Do you think that even with the other utilities out there that have had a default rate that is, do you say substantially larger differential, is this default rate unsatisfactorily too conservative to roll out?
Not in my opinion, but I think, again, because the concern for us would be bill impacts right out of the gate on customers who really have not had any experience with a time of use rate, right? To have, I think for those engaged customers, those 20% that may be willing to land on a more sophisticated rate, absolutely is too conservative for those folks, and that's why we'll try to educate them about these other options. But for the many, many Missourians who are used to a flat rate and a stable bill, I think putting them on something more extreme would almost certainly give us a high volume of calls and complaints about the bill impacts that are coming in, and be something that would negatively impact the customer experience potentially because of those bill impacts.
So when you have a residential customer that is not on a bill smoothing plan, I forget the one that you guys call
budget billing.
Budget billing, thank you. What is your average what is the average monthly fluctuation of a residential customer that is not on budget billing?
I mean, I don't have a offhand number to tell you. You mean month-to-month fluctuation?
Yeah, what is your average fluctuation? If you're not on budget billing, an average residential customer will see an average of about a 3% fluctuation of their bill month to month, up or down.
Well, there's a seasonal variation for sure between our summer rate level and our non-summer rate level. So they definitely, if you're not on budget billing, you see a significant increase because of seasonal rates. From month to month, that's just not a metric that I feel like I've got in my pocket to say how much their January to February bill changes. Certainly it's going to change seasonally with weather, be at a low point in your shoulder months like October and April, be much higher in the winter and then higher still in the summer months due to, but there is some amount of variation that customers are used to in that regard.
So I think that's my point. The customers are used to variation, and even a large variation depending on weather, depending on usage. But your main concern was that a half a cent differential, then in your words would be, somewhere approaching 1%, would be too much to spook them away from a time of use type of rate.
Well, I don't think the 1% is too much to spook them away, but I think the bill impacts that we're seeing on the deeper down rates could be substantially larger than that.
Yeah, we'll get to those, but I'm just focusing on the default rate because that's what you're defaulting customers to. That's their introduction to time of use rates. And
right, and I guess my point was that I didn't think that one isn't going to, I don't believe, going to substantially spook them at the 1% level. I thought.
So we're not going to substantially spook them at the 1%. We're going to introduce them to time of use rates. We're only going to save them 0.5% over a 12-hour period. Why did you design the default rate with those parameters that are not even in line with Dr. Faruqi's research of short duration and differential pricing to change anything?
Well, I mean, I would say we didn't design it. It was recommended in staff's testimony, but I think it's somewhat relatable to the evening savers rate that we designed. The evening savers had a bigger differential, but did have a longer off-peak. The thought that at least I would put into the evening savers that had a long on-peak and a short off-peak was that there are certain end uses, and I particularly had in mind electric vehicles, that are easy to shift to overnight. So while a customer may not, the idea that you mentioned of looking at a short on-peak window, that might be most effective at moving a whole house load that includes air conditioning and things like that, but that there are significant opportunities with some end uses to shift to the overnight. So our thinking about having that type of a rate option was, say you have someone who is home during the day, during the summer, maybe someone has a family at home, they can't get out of the way of that 2 to 7 period where there's a very high price, but they have some end uses. They either have some smart appliances or they have an electric vehicle that they can shift to the overnight hours. That still provides them that opportunity to take some actions that are going to benefit the system. And, on the evening savers, it saves them a little bit more money because there's a bigger rate differential. And on the default rate, it's still going to give them some indication that there's a difference in using power during day and night.
All right, so you talked about the evening savers, EV savers. How long is the on-peak period?
In that case, it's 16 hours. It's 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And really, as I mentioned, the idea behind that was specifically when we conceptualized it to think about the electric vehicle owner who's got the ability to charge during that 8-hour window.
So going back to your testimony, is a 16-hour on-peak period in line with what you put in there, that the research shows that you need to have, shorter duration, few hours, and significant pricing difference? Is 16 hours in line with what the research is saying you need to do?
No, and that's why we conceptualized it as targeting a specific end use, because that research really is geared towards looking at whole house and how customers can save, considering the whole universe of appliances and HVAC uses and things like that. And so I think, we did talk with Dr. Faruqi about the concept and that we've developed here, that, we wanted to have an option that looks like that customers can impact their whole house. But specifically for the EV end use, that can represent a third of a customer's usage all in one chunk. And that's a very flexible load that can move to overnight hours with very simple programming of a home charger or a vehicle. So for that particular application, I don't believe that the research that we referenced from Dr. Faruqi is contemplating that application, that we were kind of conceptualizing that rate for.
Okay, and the price differential on the EV savers on peak and off peak is?
It's closer to a 2-to-1 ratio, so it's double.
13.7 to 0.0611. Right.
It's about double. The on peak is about double the off peak.
Right.
But again, the goal there was to not negatively impact that family that is, if they have an electric vehicle, but they also have, a family at home, a stay-at-home parent with kids, to have that 28-cent on-peak rate from 2 to 7, that's really going to drive their bill up, is just to provide that savings for those things that they can control to overnight. And to me, the best example, obviously, is the electric vehicle charging.
Okay. So then on the smart savers, I just want to make sure I'm reading my graph here correctly. That has a 4-hour peak period weekdays from 3 to 7 in summer, and then 6 to 8 a.m., 6 to 8 p.m. in non-summer.
The only difference I would note is in settlement, the on-peak was moved from 3 to 7 to be 2 to 7.
2 to 7, thank you. So when looking at the smart savers, this is pretty much the only time of use rate that we've talked about thus far that really kind of adheres to Dr. Faruqi's key findings with regard to relative shortness and duration of TOU peak periods.
For that specific type of research, this is the rate that we designed with that in particular in mind.
Okay. Let's go to the non-time of use rates. So the only non-time of use rate that's been approved in the stipulation agreement is the company's current flat summer and declining block non-summer with a little bit of a flattened tail block. Is that correct?
Correct. That's the only rate with no time differentiation.
And isn't there substantial evidence that there's good policy arguments that in the absence of a time of use rates, there needs to be a rate that encourages customers to conserve energy, especially in the summer, and like an inclining block rate was a little more.
I don't believe that there's much evidence in this case of that. I think what we tried to demonstrate in this case is that what's happening as a trend in our industry is the focus on conservation is looking more across all fuels. And so if we think about the emergence of electrification, for example, an inclining block rate that I think you're referencing is going to discourage the electrification of transportation potentially. And that is actually, across fuels, an energy saving measure. So
So let me stop you there. So, because this commission has approved inclining block rates for Evergy Metro and Evergy West. And I believe the uptick on electric vehicle adoption in that side of the state is dwarfs the vehicle adoption. So you believe that an IBR rate, similar to something that staff had proposed, discourages that in the absence of a time of use rate?
Yeah, directionally it has to. It's got to increase the cost of electric vehicle charging for folks. Just that incremental usage is always going to, for almost all customers, is going to be in that tail block. And with the increase in that tail block price, it's going to increase the cost of fueling an electric vehicle. The distinction I think I would make with Evergy, I think they had done a little bit more to address other barriers to adoption in developing the clean charge network, and I would suggest that probably had more to do with the penetration of electric vehicles on their side of the state than the rate structure per se.
So you believe that this commission's previous actions in Evergy Metro and Evergy West is poor public policy to encourage conservation use of energy at the expense of EV adoption?
I think it's a policy that is seeing a lot of change nationally right now. It's something that was a common thing across many states, and Dr. Faruqi, I think, can talk at length about some of the trends that are going on nationally, that those states who do have a focus on that are starting to take a broader view. And so it's a situation where, if you look out at the Californias, and again, Dr. Faruqi could talk about, they're trying to encourage electrification to meet their emissions reduction goals and their energy savings goals. And they're moving away from that now because the electrification is really something that has had a lot of momentum built in the last few years that wasn't really contemplated as both our state and other states were making those moves into inclining block rates. So I think the landscape may be shifting for what are the priorities in terms of how do we best produce emissions reductions and energy savings with rate design.
Is Dr. Faruqi on the phone?
He is.
Dr. Faruqi? Thank you, Mr. Wills.
Yes, I'm here, Commissioner.
Oh, it's good to hear from you. Hopefully you heard the interaction I had with Mr. Wills. I guess I have a couple questions for you. Did you design the default rate for the company? And
no, I did not. The default rate that they currently have in the stipulation, I believe, was negotiated by the different parties. I am aware of it, just as I'm aware of the more attractive time of use rates, which essentially are opt-in rates. So I guess the short answer to your question, Commissioner Rube, is no.
Okay. If I were to amend the stipulation and I were to call this the Faruqi default time of use rate, would you be proud to have your name associated with this time of use rate?
With this particular default time of use rate that is in front of us?
Yes.
My personal view may not be very relevant because my understanding is this is a negotiated rate. But the way I am looking at the portfolio of choices that Ameren, Missouri has laid out as part of the stipulation, I'm essentially thinking of the default rate as essentially a flat rate, a rate that is time of use in concept, but in practice it doesn't have much differentiation. So there's some good news and bad news. The good news is there won't be people complaining that my bill just went up because the peak price was higher. The bad news, so to speak, is that there won't be much to save. And so my gut feeling as an economist, as a rate design person, is that it'll kind of just create some curiosity and interest that there is something called time of use. And if people are serious, they have smart thermostats, they have new appliances, they are environmentally conscious and aware, and they want to lower their bills, they will realize very quickly that this rate is not going to do any of those things. And therefore, there will be prime candidates for Ameren, Missouri to market the other two rates that are in the package, the Smart Savers rate and the Ultimate Savers rate. Those are two very well-designed optional rates. They're kind of like the rates we see, for example, the rate in Oklahoma was mentioned by Steve Wells. There are also rates in Arizona. They're all opt-in, and opt-in, well-designed and well-promoted, can attract as many as 57% of the customers. That's the number that Arizona Public Service has. Salt River Project in the Phoenix area has 29%, and Oklahoma Gas and Electric has 20%. So successful opt-in, there are many good examples of that. So the way I look at it is that they have a nice portfolio here. The default rate is time of use conceptually, but it won't really cause anyone to lose sleep or to save much money. However, it will introduce the concept maybe and kind of, make people aware of the fact that there is an opportunity. And, research has shown that a third to two-thirds of customers are really interested in engaging with rates, moving their load shape around and saving money. And so perhaps this could act as a pivot. The default rate, mild as it is, could stimulate awareness, and then the interested people would be directed to the two other rates. And the ones who don't want to do anything, and there are lots of those in every service area, perhaps a third of the population, they can just stay at the default rate and they'll have nothing to complain about. That's how I would look at it.
Thank you. I have a very, very educational answer. I appreciate it. I'm going to mark it down as a no, that you don't want us to put your name on the default rate. But you mentioned Arizona at 57% uptick, Phoenix at 29%, Oklahoma at 20%. How many of those states had a default rate similar to, how many of those had a default rate like what you're seeing here in Missouri with a half cent and a 12-hour?
So in Oklahoma, my understanding is the default rate is a simple flat rate with no differentiation. In Arizona, neither APS nor the Salt River Project have a default rate. So they just have choices, and they let people self-select into whatever they regard as their best option. So some people so let me perhaps give you an example from APS. APS has about 1 million customers, and they have several choices, kind of like this matrix that we have from Ameren, Missouri. Their matrix has rates that are flat rates, and there are some rates that are time of use rates, and then there is a 3-part rate. So in a sense, somewhat similar to this, but they don't have a default rate at all. So if you happen to be a small customer, and they have their definitions of small and large, less than 600 is one category, kilowatt hours per month. The next one is 600 to 1,000. If you're in that range, you can pick one of two flat rates, and there are different levels of customer charges. They can also pick, if they want, the time of use rate, but they don't have to. If you are a larger customer using more than 1,000 kilowatt hours in the Arizona Public Service territory, then you have to pick from one of 3 time of use rates. So they have sort of bucketed customers into categories, and what they're trying to do is make sure that the larger customers who are creating, in many ways, higher costs because they are bigger appliances and poorer load factors, that they are on a time of use rate that will encourage them to shift their power from the on-peak to the off-peak period. So that's kind of the approach they have used. SRP has a similar kind of approach, I would say. So if you think it might be helpful, I can also comment on what California is looking at, or I can wait for the right moment to mention that.
So, let me just ask a question before that is, so Oklahoma just, they didn't have a default time of use, so you were on the flat rate. So why have a default rate that is a half a cent over a 12-hour period, and that's how you introduce people to time of use rates? Why not just keep them on the flat rate and then promote the other time of use rates that you believe are better to the customers so that they can actually see savings? What is gained by having a default rate that is set up like this, and what is a potential downfall to having a default rate that is set up like this when compared to just having the default be the flat rate?
A great question, and maybe I can answer it in two parts, sort of the pros and cons. So what can be said positively about this very mild default rate is that it makes all of the customers that Ameren and Missouri have aware of something called time of use, because most of them probably today don't think of electricity as having a time of use character. So it will increase awareness and consciousness that there is time variation. Now, admittedly, it is very mild in the differentiation. It is really very mild. And so you could well say, well, then why have it in the first place? Why bother people with such a mild differentiation? And as I said, on the positive side, the argument is, well, now they're all aware of the fact that there is time of use. And I think philosophically, if I was following the discussions earlier when the case was being filed and conversations were taking place, I was not in those conversations, but what I picked up was the sentiment, at least I think in the staff testimony, that let's do it gradually. And I think Steve Bills mentioned this as well. Let's first bring in the notion that there is time of use, and let's have a very mildly differentiated default rate. Then as the years go by, let's begin to ramp it up. And I guess they were calling it trading wheels. I've heard it called gradualism. So if that is the intent, to gradually ramp it up and make it a robust differentiation, peak off peak, maybe 2 to 1, and have a shorter peak period, then I suspect this is probably the best way to do it. But if the idea is just to stay with this and just lock it in indefinitely, then there's a part of me that says you might be better off just keeping it as a flat rate and encouraging people to the other time of use rates that are the genuine, real time of use rates. So, I find myself somewhat in an ambivalent role here, not having been part of the negotiations and what the pros and cons were. But reading the staff testimony, I got the sense that they were supportive of default time of use rates. They just wanted to start with a relatively flat differential, with the expectation that it will ramp up over time. Again, I'm putting words perhaps into somebody else's mouth, but that would be one scenario in which I would find myself supporting this concept. And again, I'm not a party to the settlement. I'm part of the conversations, and my discussions with Steve Wills and others at Ameren have certainly indicated that this is a starting point. But the real benefit is the awareness of all the population, and then perhaps to direct them to the two other rates, smart savers and ultimate savers as being, kind of like the real time of use rates. They are modern, they are differentiated, they are easy to respond to, and I think, convenience is a big factor in rate design. Having a shorter peak period plays to the convenience idea, and I think the savers rates, both of them really are well designed from that perspective. And having choices is another good thing. they have the demand charge in one of the time of use rates, they don't have it in the other. Again, that's giving people choices. So I think the exciting part of this is the savers rate and the ultimate savers rate. The default rate, conceptually, I agree with, but yes, I don't think it'll do much to any customer's bill, either positive or negative.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the exciting part of this is the smart savers rate and the ultimate savers rate. So I appreciate your commentary and your advice and your white papers and the time you took explaining this to us today and in the past, and I appreciate your expertise. So that's the last question I had for you at this time. I do have another question for Mr. Wills.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ameren had a time of use rate of a while back. How many people used to be on that rate?
We still have that. It's designated as a pilot, and there's a little over 100 customers on it right now, and that's about where it's been for several years. I think the biggest, if I can expound on why I think that's the case, the biggest drawback with it is with AMR metering, we just don't have the current generation of metering. We don't have the information to give customers about how they're already using power, so what they're going to need to do to be successful on it. So we have, it's just something that's very difficult to communicate to a customer without that granular usage data.
So in the rate that you have now, what is the cost differential between the peak and the off-peak? I remember looking at this, but I don't remember it off the top of my head.
It's actually not too dissimilar from the Smart Savers rate. The only difference with the Smart Savers is there's an intermediate introduced. So the 2 to 7 is similar. 2 to 7 is the Smart Savers time period. 2 to 7 is our current default, or not our default, but our pilot time of use. And the ratio is similar. You have, I think, close to 30% on-peak rate with a 7, I think it's 7 cents right now on the existing pilot time of use. The Smart Savers goes from about, as we've said it here, 28 cents down to 8 cents in the intermediate and 5 cents in the off-peak. So it's the real differentiation between the Smart Savers and the existing time of use is that introduction of an intermediate price for weekend, daytime, and the balance of the day, but it's not too dissimilar. Really, the reason, like I said, I think that we've had limited uptake of the pilot rate is just the usage information that we're not able to share with customers out of our AMR system.
And when did the pilot go into effect?
I want to say 2014. Does anyone?
And didn't you have one prior to that?
Well, there was a time of use.
That was the one I was asking about.
Okay,
the one that was prior to this. Yeah.
So before that, there was I think it was a 10 to 10 instead of 9 to 9 like this, and it was. I'm trying to think what the differential was. I don't recall the size of the price differential.
It was 3 cents, 2 cents. In my mind, it was something.
It may perhaps in that range. I don't definitively recall it.
So this is why I'm asking: is your company has had a time of use rate in the past that, to my knowledge, I believe there was testimony in one case that no one used. There was not one customer on, or maybe one.
I think we had 30 back in the day.
All right, in my mind, that's zero. And it had a very large time window of 10 to 10, and the differential was in my mind from it was a couple of cents.
One other
complete, no one used it, and you're rolling out your default rate that actually has the same time frame, and you're actually lowering it, and you want us to be excited that this is. And I've been on the commission for almost 6 years. It's almost 6 years this month. I've been wanting time of use rates. I'm talking about time of use rates, and basically this is the same thing that you guys had for a long period of time, and it didn't work, and that's your default rate.
I would draw a couple of distinctions. One is that old rate also had an $8 per month incremental metering fee. So it actually, the way the math worked out, customers had to be able to use something like 2/3 of their power off in that 12-hour off-peak, and that was just literally impossible with that $8 a month. So at the time, our customer charge was $8, but if you had a time use meter, it was $16.
Basically, I'm hearing poorly designed time of use rate did not get people to participate.
So it didn't draw customers in. So I think then the distinction I would draw to our new plan is that we have some really good modern rates, I think, that are in this portfolio. We're using this other one, as Dr. Faruqi mentioned and I've mentioned, kind of just as an introductory to concept, and we will get customers on it because they'll be defaulted to it, so it won't be 30 customers being on it. But what we're hoping to do is attract them then eventually into these more sophisticated rates that have the opportunities to really create savings for customers and benefits for the system. So these other rates are, I think, very forward-thinking in that they're going to help us with getting more load flexibility that can help us integrate more renewables in the future and things. And we're building those options for modern rate design for a future where we can do that with our customers.
All right, so I think that's the last question I have for you. I'll have a couple comments, and you don't need to respond if you don't want to. It's like if I open a restaurant and I have a big grand opening and I serve everybody the most blandest meal I can possibly, and then say, now you've been to my restaurant, please come back for stuff that's really even better on my restaurant. This default rate, to me, it's like the reboot of Star Wars. I mean, it's been coming. People have been talking about it. It was going to come. It was going to be great. And you're super excited because you want it. And then you go see it, and it's the same dang movie that it was, the first time around, but just updated. I mean, the same stuff happened in that movie. And so here I'm looking at it. It's like I've been looking forward to this for a long time. You guys are finally doing it. And here's your default rate. It's the same thing that's been done. So. Yeah, the other, smart savers, that to me, that's time of use rate. I understand where you're going with wanting to introduce the people, but I think this is a flat rate with a time of use sticker on it that I don't think is going to motivate people, and I have a concern that it's going to actually, maybe disincentivize people. It's like, well, I'm on the time rate, so I didn't raise any money, and then they don't. So that's my concern.
And I think there's a little bit of this that's an experiment, and I appreciate your points on it. I really do, and I understand that perspective. One of the things that I think is going to be incumbent upon us as a company, and we've got agreements in the stipulation to do it, is to do education with this, and maybe that draws them into the more advanced rates for those customers who are engaged. But I think that's a difference between anything we've done in the past, is that we're actually going to be out trying to teach customers and approach them with new information, give them more granular usage data to do this. So I'm optimistic that we can create a positive experience for customers that get them onto modern rates. But there's something of it that is somewhat of an experiment, and I understand your perspective on it for sure.
No. I'm sure you'll get more than 30 people that are signed up. So
undoubtedly, all right.
Commissioner Coleman, did you have questions for Ameren?
Yes, I do. So many of my questions relative to the default rate have been responded to, so I'm going to let that go for a moment. But one of my other questions surround the educational outreach that Mr. Wills just started talking about. I'm really interested in what that is going to entail, how you're going to reach people, communicate these options, and specifically if there's a way it's going to be done more than just by an insert in the bill envelope.
And I think more than that has to happen, or customers aren't going to know about it, right? We know from our general communication that you have to get a message to customers multiple times using different media in order for them to hear it and understand it. So I know that currently the team that's working on AMI metering rollout, part of their charge is to think about how we communicate that to customers so they know what's going on and they understand how they can use it to benefit, to control their bill. We plan to have conversations with staff for staff to see that information. It's not done yet. It's still being worked on, right? Our first meter rolls out in June. So that process is undergoing, but the intent is for it to be not just a bill insert, because most customers don't read their bills.
Right.
So we know that's not sufficient.
Has there been any thought of media use, television ads, anything like that, or is that still in the discussion?
I don't know the answer to that question. We find that using media like that can be very cost effective. It's a great way to communicate with our customers, right? That's always the discussion we have with staff. Is it really advertising or is it communication? That's why you have Facebook. People are on Facebook, and we can use that as a method. So I'm sure that all of that is being considered. As I stand here today, I can't tell you what the passage is, but we do recognize we have a responsibility to make sure we communicate with our customers as we roll it out, and we're taking that very seriously.
I'm concerned about the elderly, those who are not on Facebook, who don't tweet, who aren't on Instagram, any of that stuff. And there are numerous, of course, a lot of folks that don't have internet access. And so I'm particularly interested and concerned that those folks who aren't, operating in more than just telephone calls, because a lot of people do still like to call the utility company to get information. I think there needs to be a really well thought out communication plan and methods to reach all of your customers.
I do not disagree.
How easy is it going to be for a customer to flip to a different plan if they opt out or don't opt out of the default rate, and so they're automatically put in the day, the night rate? And then has there been any thought about people automatically defaulting to that plan even if it makes the bill more? Because I would think that some people would find that their bill would end up being more.
I think Steve has looked at that a little bit and found that it won't be a lot more, but some will be more and some will be less, right? That's the nature of the rate. To answer the first part of the question, it's as simple as a phone call.
Okay.
Call our customer service center.
So there's not like if you haven't opted out or if you decide you want to change a plan, there's no, you're stuck in this for the next 12 months.
No.
Okay, so
No
a
one's
person
stuck.
can change as often as they desire.
There's nothing in the tariffs that would restrict them from switching back and forth. It would be hard for them maybe to gain all the benefits if they did that, but they can change,
if someone
absolutely.
decided to try it for 6 months and see what's happening and look at their records and compare their 6 months worth of data and they don't see a benefit. I like the idea, I compare my bill. I'm excited. I hate to say this, but I'm excited to get my bill because I want to know what I'm using now compared to what I used 12 months ago. So I do think that most folks would be interested in that comparison, and we'll give it a shot. But I just want to make sure that they have the ability to revert back to something or switch something as many times as they desire.
There's no restriction.
Okay, that's good to know. And I think that's my last question. Thank you. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you. Commissioner Holzman, do you have questions?
I do. Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. I don't think I've met you before, so nice to meet you.
In section 11 on the documentation, would the company have any objection to filing it in EFIS if it was provided a high confidential designation?
Did you say paragraph 11?
Yes.
Let me get there. I apologize. I didn't have it with me. I think the concern that we had is that this is going to be huge.
Okay.
This is going to be a huge amount of information. So, isn't that right? Am I wrong?
Yeah, Commissioner, so this is hourly data. Some of this data is hourly, and you're looking over a year, so you got 8,760 hours times 8 coal units. I can't do the math in my head, but these are spreadsheets that have tens of thousands of rows and columns in them. So,
And EFIS does have size restrictions, so our belief is that we would have to do something. We couldn't just upload it onto EFIS. I guess we'd have to put it on a disk and send it to the data center and see if they could upload it. But because of the size, this is why we went with providing it with the parties instead of putting it in EFIS.
Okay. In paragraph 27D1, you talk about there won't be any additional demand charges until 2025. Was there any discussion of what those charges would look like once 2025 is expired?
There was not.
Okay, so you won't even have that conversation for another 5 years.
I mean, we won't propose anything that's required for 5 years. I'm hoping there's discussion in between. And we could propose something that's an opt-in.
Okay. Paragraph 28, also, why are you delaying and offering the small general services who already have the AMIs a time of use rate? It would seem like they already have them. What's the difficulty in providing them a time of use, especially when you have some of these small general service customers could potentially be ones that would benefit the most by it if they're operating a bar and restaurant, late into the evening and have energy costs.
Steve Wills again, Framer, Missouri. Good afternoon now, Commissioner. So there is in our SGS tariff, our small general service tariff right now, a time of use option for customers. And I would actually say it's not entirely dissimilar from the evening savers option here. The reason we didn't do something new with that is, in our direct case, we really focused on making this about modernizing residential rates. So our efforts were really focused hard on coming up with a suite of rate options for residential customers. The staff did raise in testimony along the way the idea of doing something like the EV savers for the small general service. And at that point, it was really process-wise in the case, we just didn't have the rate developed or the analysis done, or really on the billing side, these things take planning, which the default rate being implemented not till 2021, a lot of that is because of the IT side of the planning. Like that default rate wasn't planned from the beginning of our rate, neither was a small general service AMI related time of use rate. So again, I think, we took the task in coming into this case to modernize our residential rates and kept our focus there just because that was a big undertaking.
But they do have a option to get into a time of use?
Yeah, so.
Okay. On paragraph 41A, it says a rolling 12-month period, but it's clear that the seasons are going to really impact, and is 12 months enough time to compare one summer to the other?
We'll have much more than 12 months. This was something that I believe was in staff testimony, and so we agreed to commit to it, but we're going to have a much longer period of time than that. So that's just what the minimum that we're allowed to have per our agreement. My expectation is to have multiple years worth of that data available.
Okay. 41B, the data that you're collecting, will that be utilized to create a hosting capacity map, or?
This is something that we're getting together with staff on. I don't think that this is really staff's ask. I believe it's more for cost of service analysis, but it might be a question for what, this is something that we're going to meet and discuss what we can track and provide in more granular fashions to the staff specifically. I think, in terms of hosting capacity, that's, I don't think that's been, as I understand it, the focus of this here, but that is something that, is on the company's radar screen. I know there's distributed energy resource workshops that have discussions of databases and things like that. I just don't know that it's at issue in this provision right here.
Okay. In paragraph 46, it goes into the income eligible weatherization assistance program. And the Missouri DOE had previously administered that program, and one of the issues they had was, getting compensated for the outlays that they had placed. Now it looks like you're going to take it to the weatherization agencies or the community action agencies in the Ameren territory. It looks like it's also going to be on a reimbursed basis. So if DOE had a hard time, getting the funds that they had expended for this program, what are some assurances that Ameren would give that these community action groups that go ahead and implement this are going to be paid back in a timely fashion?
First of all, I don't personally know if the reimbursement was really an issue. For the money that Ameren Missouri was paying, we paid it in annually every year right when we were supposed to. I don't think there was ever any issues with that. This is weatherization that's funded specifically by us, so we won't have trouble getting the funding because we're the ones providing it to the agencies.
Okay, and what about oversight in terms of what these agencies are actually going to do with the money? What's going to prevent them from using it for salaries or vehicles or other non-energy efficient related expenditures?
We'll have agreements with them that specify what they can and can't do with the money.
I see, and then who's going to follow up and make sure that they did? Will that be
I'm
in
sure
there?
staff will ask to see them. Division of Energy may ask to see them, and I'm quite confident the Office of Public Counsel will ask to see them.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. Just a couple brief follow-ups from the previous questions. Going back to what an answer that was given to Commissioner Roop on the previous TOU rate being the previous TOU rate being unrealistic because of the need to use 2/3 of the energy off-peak in order to offset the cost of the customer charge. That's what you gave that in an answer earlier?
Yeah, and I apologize. I had a small sidebar going at the beginning of your question. So that issue, we had a time of use rate for years going back before the 2014, I think, is the time that we implemented the new pilot. That was a long on-peak and off-peak period, but it had an $8 incremental customer charge, and that presents a barrier, right? Because you're starting off, like by opting to go on that bill, on that rate structure, you have an $8 kind of barrier to before you start saving.
Sure.
So they had to shift more usage under that rate design to the off-peak to actually have a lower bill than would be the case under something where there's no incremental customer charge.
So then looking at the ultimate saver rate, what's that ratio under that rate given the demand charge that's also included in that rate?
So the demand charge is fully offset by a reduction in the energy charge. So if you what you'll see is that all of these rates are designed that for the typical customer, if they're very, very average, they have average amount of usage, average timing of usage, they'll have the same bill on all of these rates as a starting point. So the demand charge being an incremental cost, but there's also, if you'll notice, for example, in the summer, the off-peak energy charge is 4.46 cents. That's in effect for all hours of the summer other than summer weekdays from 2 to 7. So for 80% of hours, they're getting an energy charge that's like 1/3 of the normal energy charge. So if you have these were all designed what we call to be revenue neutral, to mean that the average customer, if you pick any of these and you have system average load characteristics, you're going to be indifferent on all these rates as a starting point, so that the first thing that you do to shift usage is going to start saving you net money. Now, an individual customer may vary. Someone whose lifestyle has them, using a lot of power from 2 to 7 is going to have a higher bill on one of these time varying rates. But again, for that very average customer, they start out almost indifferent to any of these rates. They're revenue neutral in that way.
And the information that they're provided 6 months after receiving their AMI meter will break down every single one of these rate options.
That's the plan that's under development, so that they can see. Now, the average customer should be indifferent. How are you going to be? Are you going to be indifferent, or are you going to be starting in a hole by being on this rate, or starting with an advantage by being on that rate, and give them that information?
Okay, and is any of that education anticipated to start before that initial, hey, it's been 6 months, here's your bill insert?
So there's a provision in the stipulation that we will start at the time they get the meter. They will get information about the rate. The problem is we won't have their AMI, because we're just putting in the AMI meter. We won't have their specific usage to be able to tell them how they're going to do on the rate, but they will get information that explains what the rates are. Basically, then when they can start accessing that is really a function of our IT programming efforts right now, and that's why we have a series of meetings with staff and Office of Public Counsel to talk about when that's going to become available to customers. But I can tell you it's going to be at the earliest opportunity that our folks can do a good job programming the tools that are necessary for them.
And once you've selected that rate, after 6 months, you've got all the data from the previous 6 months, you've looked at the comparison, you've chosen a rate. What tools will be available to the customer moving forward so that 3 months down the road, they can look back and say, okay, well, did I make the right choice?
Yeah, so that tool will be indefinitely available, that rate comparison. So you should always, once you've gotten enough AMI data to do some rate comparisons, you can always go back and look at that and say, okay, is what I initially did the right choice? Should I be switching out now? And with that, I do want to give a clarification of something that Ms. Tatro said in response to Commissioner Coleman's question. Customers can always switch to any of the flat rate or the default rate, but I think the more advanced rates that you can't just pop in and out of them. So I think that at least the way the tariffs are drafted, if you go on the Smart Savers rate, you can go back to the flat or the default rate anytime, but if you've left Smart Savers, you can't, then you have to wait 12 months to come back to Smart Savers. But my point to your question was that at any time they can use that rate comparison tool to evaluate their options and see, am I on the right rate? And in almost all cases, they can switch back out. They just can't switch back to Smart Savers or Ultimate Savers if they've just moved off of it. But if they've moved on to it, they can go back to a flat rate or a default day-night rate.
And that's a 12-month prohibition in the way?
It's 12 months.
Okay. What are your projections for, and this is kind of also tying into Commissioner Roop's questions, how many people are you projecting to go on each of these rates? I mean, you have to have ideas of how many people you think will stay default and how many people you think will move.
So we didn't do any explicit.
So maybe not specifically breaking them all down, but like how many people do you expect to stay on default?
So again, we didn't do explicit forecasting. I think what we've done is just kind of looked to other utilities' experience to give ourselves a range that may occur. And I think that, Dr. Faruqi mentioned some of those numbers at other utilities. And, we went into this with an expectation of moving, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of customers over time onto these smart rates. I've had in my mind and what I talk about with customers that OG&E example of 20%, but that's not like an explicit target or forecast that Ameren has established, so to speak.
So you think it would be reasonable to expect 80% to stay on the default rate?
Yeah, or some of them may even go back to the completely flat rate. I mean, that's an expectation, but this is going to be dynamic over time. What we could do is, achieve one level and then do a later marketing wave and try to bring more people on also. So I think it'll be dynamic over time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, Commissioner Holzman.
Thank you. How does this interact with distributed generation customers who are bringing solar power onto the grid? If they're bringing solar power onto the grid in on-peak time, and they have rollover credits at the end of the month that are going to be applied to the next month, how do you envision them getting the value of pulling on-peak generation? Are you going to amortize it over both rates, or are you going to actually be able to identify that power for the value that is created?
So actually, the more advanced time of use rates right now are listed as is not eligible for net metering, and that's just as a function of the way the net metering law prescribes the way we settle it, which is that you net the full energy produced and consumed over the course of the month. And if you do a monthly netting, then there's one number of consumption that doesn't fit into time of use buckets. So it really is those tariffs are at least currently not compatible with.
So if you have distributed generation, you're not going to be eligible for time of use?
Certainly for the more advanced time of use rights now, since the default is something that as the staff proposed it in this case, and we've been working through it, we're still drafting the tariff. It doesn't even have any specific provisions yet that we're working on those provisions for the default day-night rate.
Well, I would certainly encourage you to figure out a way to integrate our distributed generation customers with the opportunity to maximize the value of their investments.
Sure, I appreciate that.
Commissioner Roop?
Yes. So how would, if the net metering laws and rules and stuff won't allow you to use the time of use rates, then how would the default one actually still fit? Is it because it's not really a time of use rate, or you don't have to be subject to the laws and the rules that are out there for the other ones?
That's actually, I believe, an issue for tariff drafting that we haven't even really discussed with the staff yet who proposed the rate. So, I mean, it's something that we're actually going to be working through as we draft compliance tariffs with that rate.
So you can draft a compliance tariff for the default rate so that it would work with net metering, but you can't draft tariffs for evening savers, smart savers, and ultimate savers that it would work with in net metering.
I mean, I believe it's technically possible to write one.
So you can, you're just not going to.
We haven't at this point.
Thank you.
Are there any other commission questions for Ameren at this time? All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Well, with that, we've been going over an hour and a half. I'd like to go ahead and take a 10-minute break and then return with staff and the other parties on questions for the presentation. So let's go ahead and break until 12:50.
Question for staff.
Wait a second. Sorry. Okay, I apologize. Right as I went off the record, the commissioners informed me that they may not have questions for the other parties except for one for staff. So if everybody's still in the room, I apologize to those listening in.
Before you start, I want to make a clarification.
Okay.
Are we on the record?
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the sheet that I handed out with the rates,
Yes.
I am told that may not be the final rates. I thought they were, so that was attorney not knowing what was going on. I apologize. They're still being calculated and there's still discussion between staff and Ameren, so some of those numbers may change. Sarah, do you agree with that? There she is. Okay.
So you're saying that there's a chance that the default rate could substantially improve than what's on this?
I fear the default rate is not going to substantially change.
Darn.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, you said you had a question for staff.
I do. I just have one question.
Do you want to just ask that question or do you want to hear from staff otherwise?
No, I just want to ask the question.
Okay, go ahead.
It's okay. So in the stipend agreement on 48, there's a section on dues and donations. Signatories agree that staff's position on dues and donations as contained in the staff report may be adopted for the purposes of this settlement for the following groups and associations. I would just like a breakdown of what all of those acronyms are of those groups.
Mr. Chairman, that, even though it refers to staff's report, the actual acronyms and that paragraph itself was, I believe, the impetus from Office of Public Counsel.
Okay.
So
Well, whoever can tell me what these acronyms are, that's all I want to know, and I'm done.
Commissioner Sylvie, my witness is going to correct me on this, but I know it's water group, there's regulatory group. Actually, I'm just going to turn the mic over.
I've got UARG. Does anybody know what that is?
United Air Regulatory Group.
Okay. US.
I'm sorry, Jeff, GEOFF, Mark, MARKE.
Okay, so just to repeat, UARG is
Utility Air Regulatory Group.
Okay, USWAG.
Utility Solid Waste Alliance Group.
UWAG.
Utility Water Alliance Group.
MOG.
Midwest Ozone Group.
RegForm. What is RegForm?
RegForm is a group that's located here in Jefferson City. I think they are called RegForm.
Okay.
It's Missouri RegForm.
Okay. IERG.
Illinois. It's the Illinois version. It's of RegForm.
Okay. And then it just says other environmental group dues. How broad is that?
There were no other environmental groups that were identified, and I'm using the term environmental very loosely here.
Okay. So how would that work then? It says other environmental groups, so would the company just be able to band dues
if I
to
may
whoever they
explain.
wanted if it's an environmental
Right,
group?
this is a black box settlement with a dollar number. The Office of Public Counsel thought it was important to specifically identify certain groups that it didn't want anyone to think that it had signed off on the dues being included in that -32, so that's why they're listed there. I don't know that there is any other environmental group due that had been identified. Those were the ones that were at issue.
Okay, thank you. That is my question, Judge. Thank you.
All right. Okay, and Commissioner Holzman had a question, I believe, for Renew Missouri.
Yes. Was there any discussion concerning the net metered customers and the prohibition on their ability to have time of use?
Commissioner, I don't want to get into any discussions that would be considered settlement discussion. I will say, for Renew Missouri's perspective, the net metering customers were some class of customers we were very concerned about potentially being forced onto certain rates in the future. Whether they would be prohibited was not something we specifically identified within our positions we've taken.
Okay. Well, I would just make a comment that this is a great concern to me, that these customers would not have access to time of use, so much so that I think it needs to be revisited and talked about, if not today for the settlement, then certainly for the July discussion that comes up. Thank you.
And were there any other commission questions for any of the other parties?
Judge, I don't mean to
Mr. Hall?
interrupt, but we
Go
just
ahead.
got a clarification that the Reg Form Group is not a standalone term. It's actually Regulatory Environmental Group is the full group's name. For Missouri.
Just for the record, when you said alliance, it was actually activities. The A in these things, it was activities. So note to self, Mr. Byrne is right, should never put in abbreviations without spelling it out completely. So I have to give him that one.
Mr. Chairman.
Just to clarify, the numbers on the sheet that you gave us, you indicated are not final. When can we expect to see final, and which programs do you expect to be moving?
I will let Steve or Sarah talk about that. Obviously, we have to have final rates to do the tariff, so we need to come to agreement on that soon. We just haven't had an opportunity to do so.
Once that agreement is reached, can we receive a document as succinct as
You wanted
this
to
one?
update that document? We could certainly do that.
Instead of combing through the tariff to figure.
Right. I understand. We can do that, sure.
Thank you.
I would just say, these are the rates that Ameren Missouri has drafted and circulated to staff, and they're in a review process on them. I'm not aware of any major material changes, but certainly changes in, the last couple decimal place or something like that. I don't know if that's what we just have to get their review and feedback.
Okay, well, once the tariff is drafted, if you could update this document and circulate to the commissioners, I think we would appreciate that.
As soon as we feel we all have agreement on those, I will do so. Thank you.
And Ms. Lange, you look like you might have another comment. You're in agreement.
Well, I have a lot of comments, but I'll withhold them.
All right. Commissioner Coleman, you had
Just one, Mr. Wills, just to confirm, the last information you gave us about the customer's ability to opt in or opt out is your final answer.
Yes, so there's no limitation on when you could go to these top two rates. You can, if you're on one of the more sophisticated time of use rates, you can opt to those. But if you've been on a Smart Savers and leave it, then there's a 12-month waiting period to go back on it, or the evening or the Ultimate Savers.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Judge.
Okay. Are there any other commission questions for any of the parties? All right. Seeing no more commission questions, we will take a break and we will come back with a few housekeeping. And I just will have one question about the tariff effective dates and how you see the procedural side of things going forward with new tariffs and requesting the commission to approve the stipulation and so forth. So with that in mind, let's take a short break and come back at 1 o'clock. This time we are off the record and going on a break. All right, let's go ahead and go back on the record. Okay, we're back on the record after our break, and before we get into housekeeping stuff, we'll sort of procedural issues. My question was, so the agreement contemplates the commission approving tariffs to be effective April 1, or it says as soon thereafter as possible. How was that going to work if you don't have the tariffs put together yet, correct?
I mean, we always have to, this happens at, there's probably more in this case, but it always happens that we have to redo the tariffs because the rate we filed is never the rate that ultimately gets ordered. So we're working right now to put those rates together. I believe we've drafted them, we've circulated them to staff to look at. So albeit there's probably a few more tariffs that issue, this is really no different than the process that normally occurs. The commission, I presume, I hope, will issue an order approving the stipulation. They will then reject the tariffs that are currently filed and order us to refile tariffs that are in compliance with the order, and we will do so. The commission will allow people time to look at it and confirm that they're accurate and then approve them effective April 1st.
Okay. But those will just be tariffs dealing with the stipulation and agreement. We still have two issues, but those issues, the effect on the tariff of the issues that are outstanding will go into effect and later tariffs.
So there are two issues. One is AMS costs and dealing with the affiliate transaction rules. If the commission were to find that some of those costs shouldn't be recovered, we've agreed to put those costs into a regulatory liability, and they will go into rates in the next rate case. If the commission decides to change the FAC sharing percentage, since this case will still be open, the commission can then order us to go back and change that sharing percentage in the FAC. So the one that we're filing to take effect April 1st will be 95.5, but it can still be changed in this case, because of course the FAC tariff has to change in a rate case.
Correct, okay. And so if say the commission at its next opportunity, which would be next week's agenda, was able to approve the stipulation and agreement, how soon do you think then that tariffs could be filed in compliance with that order?
I mean, typically we have been able to file them within days because we start working on them even before we get the commission order. You know, we presume the commission's going to approve the stip, although I recognize that's a presumption. So we would hope within a matter of days, and but at this point we don't have an agreement. Right, staff hasn't completed their review, and we haven't had whatever discussions to make sure we're all agreeing with the final numbers, but that's underway.
Okay, and then of the other parties, if Ameren files compliance tariffs, how quickly will the other parties be able to review those tariffs and know that they have no objection? Would you envision that once Ameren submits them, Ameren's going to have your permission that those are?
Just to be clear, our goal, we probably will circulate them to all the parties as soon as we feel like we have the right numbers so that they can start reviewing them. Obviously, the commission needs to give the other parties some amount of time to review them and make sure they are indeed what we claim they are. Mm-hmm. So it's a hurried process at the end.
So typically, when they file the tariffs, staff and OPC are going to have had a chance to look at them and know whether or not they comply, or will you need a day or a couple of days or?
Yeah, typically, Judge, I just checked with my head of my tariff department. She typically on a stipulated rate case will have somewhere from 3 to 5 days to review compliance tariffs.
Okay.
Because not only do we have to review them, then obviously we have to make a recommendation too.
Well, I'm just trying, we're within a month of April 1st, and, only 3 agenda dates, and the commission at the least needs 10 days for an effective date, unless there's, I suppose, a waiver of that from.
You need that
all
on
of
a
the parties.
non-contest, I shouldn't say non-contested. On a stipulated case, you need 10 days?
The typical practice has been, the courts have told us that anything less than 10 days is unreasonable, so we try to abide by that.
And we'll use those 10 days to, if we have agreement on the tariffs beforehand, we'll be circulating them to all the parties so that parties can look at, we will do everything we can to help speed this up. When we file the tariffs, we'll file for expedited treatment. And if we end up not making April 1st, then we don't make April 1st. But it's a rate decrease. I think the parties have incentive to review quickly and try to get tariffs in place.
Right.
Judge, this may not make you feel better, but perhaps it will. We are, I think, on virtually the exact same timeline we were on in the last rate case that was settled. I think we filed that stipulation right at the end of February. We were, I think we looked at the dates, we're on the same timeline, and we all made it that time. So
Okay.
that doesn't guarantee success, but I know it's been done pretty much just like this before.
No, that is helpful. That's the reason I'm asking about it now, because I'm trying to get ahead of any timing issues or anything that we might have, and let the commission know what to expect on their calendar. So, okay. Were there any other statements or issues that you all wanted to get on the record today in front of the commission that you didn't have the opportunity to present?
Judge, if I might, just for the commission's benefit, if they have any further questions on weatherization, they're invited to look at the testimony of Ms. Early, which I believe answered a majority of Mr. Commissioner Holzman's questions.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have anything that they wanted to clarify or, like I say, get on the record today?
Judge, it's not really a clarified today's presentation, but I did have a question regarding next week's hearing.
All right.
Do you envision both a general opening and an opening for each individual issue? Since there's only 2 issues, do you really need,
Ms. Tadro, it looks like she wants to have input on this.
I agree. I don't think we need a general opening. I think we could just do openings on each issue.
Oh.
If I can speak up, the idea of having one umbrella opening and many openings was an ask that OPC had with the parties. Considering there's only 2 remaining issues for debate, I think just having 2 separate openings or one makes sense.
I think that makes sense since the issues aren't necessarily related. So I think we could just do an opening on each issue.
Just do the minis then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's just plan to do that. Okay, so we wanted to go ahead and introduce some of the testimony. And you all each sent me your pre-marked exhibit lists. Shall we just begin then with Ameren? What testimony did you have that you wanted to offer up today?
And these have been already marked and given to the court reporter. 001 is the direct testimony of Warren Wood. 009 is the rebuttal testimony of Matt Michaels. That was one we had previously reserved, but then the issue ended up getting resolved, so we'll go ahead and add that in today. As well as 010, so rebuttal of Matt Michaels. 017, rebuttal testimony of Todd Shotsky. 18, Jim Williams, rebuttal testimony. 19, Marcy Altoff, direct testimony. 20, Marcy Altoff, rebuttal testimony. 21C and 21P is S. Hyundai Burke's direct testimony, confidential and public. Direct, if I did say that. 22C and 22P is Mark Burke direct testimony, confidential and public. 23 is the direct testimony of Ahmad Faruqi. 24 is the rebuttal testimony of Ahmad Faruqi. 25 is the direct testimony of Michael Harding. 26 is the rebuttal testimony of Michael Harding. 27C and P is the direct testimony of Kelly Hassenfranz, confidential and public. 28 is the direct testimony of Robert Hevert. 29 is the rebuttal testimony of Robert Hevert. 30 is the direct testimony of Thomas Hickman. 31 is the rebuttal testimony of Thomas Hickman. 32C and P is the rebuttal testimony of Jeffrey Jones, confidential and public. 33 is the rebuttal testimony of Mitchell Lansford. 34 is rebuttal testimony of David Lesh. 35 is rebuttal testimony of Trina Muniz. Wow, we have a lot of witnesses. 36 is the direct testimony of Ryan Matursky. 37 is the rebuttal testimony of Ryan Matursky. 38 is the direct testimony of Daryl Sagal. 39C and P is the rebuttal testimony of Daryl Sagal, confidential and public. 40 is the rebuttal testimony of Bradley Seltzer. 41 is the direct testimony of John Spanos. 42 is the rebuttal testimony of John Spanos. 43 is direct testimony of Brenda Weber. 44 is the rebuttal testimony of Brenda Weber. 45 is rebuttal testimony of Scott Wibbenmeyer. 46 is the direct testimony of Stephen Wills, and 47 is the rebuttal testimony of Stephen Wills. The remaining testimonies will be offered at the hearing next week.
Okay, would there be any objection to those items of testimony coming into the record? And seeing none, then I will admit each of those that Ms. Tatro just listed. Staff, what exhibits did you want to offer today?
Judge, I thought what we would do is just offer everything except what's going to be reserved for the hearing next week, so maybe if I turn on my microphone, that'd be good. Okay, Exhibit 100 is the revised direct testimony of Lisa Ferguson. It's in the front. And when I say revised, that was already, it was pre-filed. Gives the court reporter a few minutes.
Do you want me to get from one at a time?
Okay, well, no, yeah, we can, now, they haven't been marked, okay, on the thing. Do you need them?
That's all right, we'll.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay, good enough. Okay, Exhibit 101 would be the staff report, cost of service, and that would be both 101C and 101 public. 102 is also both confidential and public versions. Appendix 1, Appendix 2, and Appendix 3 of the staff cost of service report. Exhibit 103 is the, and again, confidential and public. Appendix 4, Parts 1 and 2 of the staff cost of service report. Exhibit 104, which is just public, staff's direct accounting schedules. Exhibit 105 is the direct testimony of Jay Lubert. Exhibit 106, both confidential and public, staff report on class cost of service with Appendix 1 and Appendix 2. Exhibit 107 is the supplemental direct testimony of Sarah Lange. Exhibit 108 is the rebuttal testimony of Paul Abenthor. Exhibit 109, rebuttal testimony of Corey Bousted. Exhibit 110, both confidential and public, the rebuttal testimony of Contessa King. Exhibit 111, rebuttal testimony of Kim Cox. Exhibit 112, rebuttal testimony of Lisa Ferguson. Exhibit 113, rebuttal testimony of Robin Cleathermos. Exhibit 114, rebuttal testimony of Sean Lange. Exhibit 115, rebuttal testimony of Jay Lubert. Exhibit 116, rebuttal testimony of Dana Eves. Exhibit 117, both confidential and public, rebuttal testimony of Jason Kunst. Exhibit 118, rebuttal testimony of Karen Lyons. Exhibit 119, both confidential and public, rebuttal testimony of Antonia Nieto. Exhibit 120, rebuttal testimony of, no, excuse me, that one is reserved for next week. So Exhibit 121, rebuttal testimony of Sarah Lange. Exhibit 122, rebuttal testimony of Michael Stallman. Exhibit 123 is reserved for next week. So we would go to Exhibit 124, both confidential and public, rebuttal testimony of Jeffrey Smith. Exhibit 125, confidential and public, rebuttal testimony of John Cassidy. Exhibit 126, rebuttal testimony of Matthew Young. Exhibit 127 is reserved for next week. So Exhibit 128 is the supplemental surrebuttal of Daniel Beck. And Exhibit 129 is the supplemental surrebuttal of Sarah Lange. Those are that too. And I think that is all of them.
Right, would there be any objection to those staff exhibits, basically 100 through 119, 121, 122, 124 through 126, 128, and 129 coming into the record? Seeing none, I will admit those exhibits. Public counsel, did you have exhibits you wanted to offer at this time?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. We provided an exhibit list, but off the record, we had discussed your preferred numbering section, so I'll just be clear on what numbers are assigned to which testimony. Today, public counsel offers the testimony exhibit 203 is the direct testimony of Jeff Mark. 204 will be the rebuttal testimony of Jeff Mark. 205 is the surrebuttal testimony of Jeff Mark. 209 is the direct testimony of John A. Robinette. Exhibit 210, the direct testimony of John S. Riley.
I'm sorry, 209 was which one?
Direct testimony of John Robinette.
Okay, go ahead.
Exhibit 211, both public and confidential, is the direct testimony of Amanda C. Connor. Exhibit 212, the rebuttal testimony of Amanda Connor. Exhibit 213 will be the direct testimony of David Murray, both public and confidential. Exhibit 214 will be the rebuttal testimony of David Murray, both public and confidential. And that is all the testimony public counsel offers today.
Okay, was there, I'm sorry, but since we had a little difference in our numbering, I just want to make sure I got that right. So it was 203, 204, 205, 209, 211, 212, 213, and 214?
210 was the direct testimony of John Riley, and 211 is Amanda Connor.
Okay, that's what, I thought I'd missed one in there somewhere. All right, then, seeing that, are there any objections then to those exhibits of Office of the Public Counsel coming into the record at this time? Seeing none, I will admit those exhibits. Division of Energy, you had exhibits you wanted to offer at this time?
Yes, Judge, thank you. The Division of Energy has two exhibits. The first is Exhibit 300, which is the direct testimony of Marcy Early, that's Oerly. And then we also offer the DE Exhibit 301, which is the direct testimony of Mr. Martin R. Hyman. And that's it.
And you've given copies of those to the court reporter, or you have some for the court reporter?
I have copies available.
Okay. Be sure and give those to her, please. Would there be any objections to Exhibits 300 and 301? Seeing none, I will admit those. MECG? Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr.
Oh.
Witzmall had to leave.
Yes.
To go to the hearing, but he did leave his one piece of testimony, which would be, looks like it's exhibit number 350, the direct testimony of Steve Chris.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kaufman, for...
And hand delivering this in no way am I endorsing.
I appreciate that. And I did excuse Mr. Woodsmall earlier. Would there be any objection to, I realize he's vulnerable here, but would there be any objection to Exhibit 350 coming into the record at this time?
We really want to, but we won't.
I appreciate your restraint. I will receive Exhibit 350 into the record. Renew Missouri, did you want to offer your exhibit?
Sure, Judge. Renew Missouri would offer the rebuttal testimony of Emily Piontek. That's Piontek.
And that was numbered exhibit number 400. Would there be any objection to Exhibit 400? Seeing none, then I will admit that. MIEC.
Thank you, Your Honor. MIEC would offer Exhibit 450, which is the direct testimony of Brian Andrews. Exhibit 451, which is the direct testimony of Greg Meyer. Exhibit 452, which is the direct testimony of Christopher Walters. Exhibit 453, which is the direct testimony of Morris Brubaker. Exhibit 454, which is the rebuttal testimony of Morris Brubaker. And Exhibit 455, which is the rebuttal testimony of Christopher Walters.
And would there be any objection to Exhibits 450 through 455 coming into the record? Seeing none, then I will receive those exhibits. Sierra Club, do you have, I realize you're not physically here to give me your exhibits, but did you want to offer your exhibits at this time?
Well, if the offer is effective without us having a physical copy to present, we would like to, yes.
Go ahead, since we, I will.
And they are Exhibit 550, the revenue requirement direct testimony of Avi Allison with the exhibits filed therewith. Exhibit 551, the revenue requirement rebuttal testimony of Avi Allison with the exhibits accompanying it. And I see I omitted what should be Exhibit 552, the rate design direct testimony of Avi Allison with accompanying exhibits.
Okay. And would there be any objection to Exhibits 550 through 552? Seeing none, I will receive those, and I would just ask Sierra Club if you would
File an amended exhibit list.
Well, the exhibit lists weren't filed, but I was just trying to get a physical copy to the court reporter, but I think we can get that from you. Well, are you all going to be here next week?
I have a suggestion, Your Honor.
Yes.
Ameren Missouri will print those out and bring them over for you.
All right, never mind. Ameren is going to print those out and bring those to us so we can mark those copies. Thank you.
I appreciate that.
And
That's why. Thank you. This is Chuck Smith.
all right. Josh Smith. Oh, Tony Mendoza. And Consumer Counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. Consumers Counsel would offer Exhibit 600, which is the direct testimony of Jacqueline A. Hutchison.
Would there be any objection to Exhibit 600? Seeing none, I will receive that into evidence. Did I miss anybody? Is there any other exhibits that need to come in today? Okay, I see none. Ms. Tadro, you have
I
a question?
apologize, I have a question. What's the timing? Is that something I can bring to the hearing next week? Or do we need to get that printed and back to you today?
If you could bring it today, that would be best, and that way I can keep it with this transcript.
All right, will do.
Easier. Thank you. Okay, now I'm getting just a couple of questions, so if you'll hang on just a second, let me see if we've got everything wrapped up.
And I do have one more question when you're done.
Okay, Ms. Tatro, you said you had another question?
Just a couple things. First of all, yesterday, as we were printing out the copies for the court reporter, we realized that the affidavit had been left off of the testimony of Laura Moore, and we late filed that affidavit with a request for the commission to accept it. So I bring that to your attention, ask for an order if that's possible. And then the second thing is to make sure you are aware that our witness, Mr. Reed, for next week must testify on Wednesday.
Okay.
I know that issue is the second issue, but I would hope we would have time on Wednesday. We don't have as many witnesses on the FAC.
And I wanted to make sure that it was clear that your witnesses for Thursday be available at least in the afternoon on Wednesday, in hopes that, especially since we're going to do the mini openings, not the other, we're doing all the exhibits now, we shouldn't have a lot of extraneous stuff that we have to do. And yes, I'm glad you brought the affidavit motion to my attention. I had it here and I forgot to mention it earlier. I will grant your motion to accept the late filed affidavit of Laura Moore, and if that is now attached to the exhibit that you gave the court reporter.
Yes.
Yes, good. All right. So here's the pressing question. What happens if the commission does not approve the stipulation and agreement? What would hearings look like then?
That was actually a concern of mine about a little less than a month ago, before we got down to negotiations in earnest on this thing, because I don't think you can do it in the two, if recent past history is an indication, I don't think you could do it in 2 weeks. I mean, there were so many issues. You don't have any. I don't even know how many issues are subsumed within the black box 32 million reduction. I mean, we had, when we printed out our preliminary list of issues, It was, and some of these probably weren't issues, I'll say that, but at least issues that might develop into issues. Single-spaced, we had, I think, 4 pages worth of one-line issues. So that'd give you some idea of how many you're looking at. I don't know, 100 issues.
So I heard some issues raised by some of the commissioners. I don't know how significant. I don't know, if those issues are enough for them to vote against the stipulation or so forth, but it's always a consideration, right? Since it's not over till it's over. So,
and Judge, if I may, I think it makes a difference as to what the commission has issues with. If the commission simply says we reject the stipulation agreement, then we're sort of all up in the air about what we can do and do we try all of these issues. If the commission has issues with particular items and identifies those, then the typical practice is the parties rush back together to discuss how we can address the commission's issues and try to submit a revised stipulation agreement. And if that's the case here, depending on the number of issues, it may be something that we can resolve quickly and address them in another agreement, or tee up just a few issues for hearing and address those relatively expeditiously as well.
So it is possible, say, that if the commission had particular issues with the stipulation and agreement, even though the stipulation agreement says take it as is or nothing, but it is possible that the parties would still be willing to work on some issues if they were critical to the entire resolution of this. I know it's a black box, but.
Right. If the commission raises an issue and a concern, my client certainly is going to take that into account and see if there's a way to address the issue that still works for everyone.
Okay. I just wanted to get that out there. It says, like I say, I'm not counting any chickens until they're hatched, right? So.
Don't kill them early either.
We won't kill them early either, no. All right, is there anything else that we need to discuss on the record? Any other questions about the proceeding next week?
Well, Judge, as an evidentiary matter, do you have I'm unclear. Do you have reservations about accepting this testimony before a stipulation is accepted by the commission at this time? Or are we treating the testimony that was offered to all by the parties as accepted, pending approval by the commission of the stipulation?
I think we'll go ahead and treat it as accepted. If the stipulation should somehow not get approved, then I will allow a change at a hearing. If we'll address those pieces of testimony again if need be. But for now, let's go ahead and have them as entered. It's taken care of. If an issue gets rejected, then I will also at that time reject the testimony on that issue.
Thank you.
Your Honor, if I may, just on this issue, I agree with what Mr. Mills said and what Ms. Tatro said. I also, and I don't think you have this impression, I wouldn't want to leave the impression that not approving the stipulation would necessarily, it would be an easy path to figure out what to do in that, or that the parties automatically will agree on what to do. I think it would be a difficult situation to be in. It's one where that risk always exists when you have a stipulation like this. This is no different than any other case, but it wouldn't be easy, so I don't want the impression to be left that it would, or that it would necessarily work out in a way that you or the commission would necessarily feel good about, or the parties as well. So it'd be a tough thing to deal with. Obviously, we would do our best.
Thank you.
And Judge, if I could, too. Remember that we're dealing with a rate decrease here, I think that is important to keep in mind, and Ameren has agreed to get the rates into effect fairly soon, and just toss that out there for what it's worth.
I appreciate that, and the commission is certainly aware of that as well, and I'm not trying to make it sound like I'm not trying to make it sound like in any way I have any idea what the commission will decide. I'm not trying to speak for the commission before they have made a decision. I just am trying to keep all of the options on the table until this is approved so that we're able to timely make a decision. And we have all the information that we need to do so. So, Mr. Mills?
If you were done with that, I wanted to move on to something else. I'd like to request to be excused from the hearing next week on the record.
All right. You may be excused. I always have my caveat that anyone who's not present obviously waives any right to make any objection or add additional evidence.
Understood. Thank you.
And were there others that wanted to ask to be excused as well?
Yes, Judge. The Division of Energy would respectfully request to be excused from next week, again with your caveat that we waive any objections.
And that is fine. Any others?
Your Honor, this is Joshua Smith at Sierra Club. If I may request, can we submit something in writing to that effect? I need to discuss with my co-counsel before we waive.
Oh, certainly. Certainly. That's fine.
Thank you. So on behalf of NRDC, I would ask to be excused.
And NRDC may be excused as well.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right, I do appreciate all the hard work that you've put together and put in on putting together this stipulation and the settlement of the issues thus far, and it is has lightened my load substantially. So thank you, and I look forward to hearing the last of the case next week. We can go ahead and go off the record.